The December wind howled outside Miller's diner, rattling the frosted windows as if the night itself wanted to come in. Inside, the yellow lights hummed, the smell of baking grease clung to the air, and the worn red booths carried the stories of truckers, lonely salesmen, and tired shift workers. It was just another graveyard shift for Grace Miller, a 27-year-old waitress with aching feet and a heart that refused to harden no matter how much life pushed her down. Grace tied her apron tighter, tucked a pencil behind her ear, and glanced around the half-empty diner. The jukebox in the corner sputtered out an old country tune no one was listening to. She wiped the counter mechanically, her eyes heavy from a double shift. For most people, this job was a paycheck. For Grace, it was survival. Rent was due. Tuition for the nursing program she dreamed of was still far away. And Christmas was just a week out, but her wallet was too thin to even think about gifts. Then the door opened. The little bell above the diner's door gave a weak jingle, and in came a man who looked like he'd walked through a storm. His coat was torn, his beard untrimmed, and his boots were so worn down that one sole flapped with every step. Heads turned. A couple of truckers near the window exchanged glances, smirking into their coffee cups. Grace noticed how the man hesitated at the entrance, as if he wasn't sure he belonged there. He finally shuffled toward a booth by the window, shoulders hunched, trying to make himself invisible. Grace picked up her notepad and walked over. "Evening," she said softly, offering the same smile she gave every customer, no matter how they looked. "Coffee to start." The man's eyes lifted to hers, pale blue, tired but not defeated. He nodded once. His voice was gravelly when he spoke. "Just coffee, thank you, miss." Grace scribbled, then asked, "Anything to eat?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe later, let me think on it." Grace recognized the look. She had seen it too many times, the look of someone counting quarters in their mind, weighing hunger against dignity. She didn't press. She simply poured him a steaming cup and left a menu in front of him. Back at the counter, Karen Brooks, the diner's manager, leaned against the register, her sharp eyes following the man like a hawk spotting prey. Karen was the kind of boss who cared more about numbers than people. She clicked her tongue. "Grace, don't waste your time. He's not going to order, just nursing that coffee until we kick him out." Grace swallowed her irritation. "He's still a customer, Karen." Karen smirked barely. "Don't let him sit too long. We're not running a charity." Grace turned away before her temper got the better of her. She had learned long ago that arguing with Karen only made things worse. The man sat quietly, sipping his coffee, staring out at the snow swirling under the streetlight. After 20 minutes, he put the menu down with a sigh. Grace walked back over. "Decide on something," she asked gently. He hesitated, then admitted, "I'd love a hot meal, but I don't have enough. I'm sorry." Grace's chest tightened. She thought of her own empty fridge back home, of the way her mother used to say, "Kindness is free, but it feeds the soul." Without giving herself time to second-guess, Grace smiled. "Don't worry about it. Dinner s on me tonight." The man blinked. "I can't let you." "You can," Grace interrupted softly. "Everyone deserves a warm meal." His throat worked as if he was swallowing down something more than hunger. Finally he whispered, "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." Grace nodded, hiding her own emotions behind professional calm. She walked back to the counter, scribbled the order, and slipped a few crumpled bills from her own tip jar to cover it. Karen's voice sliced through the air. "What the hell are you doing?" Grace froze. Karen had seen. "You paid for his food," Karen's voice carried, making the truckers glance over with interest. "This isn't a soup kitchen, Grace. Are you out of your damn mind?" Grace's cheeks flushed, but she stood her ground. "He's hungry, Karen. It's just one meal. I covered it myself." Karen's lip curled. "That's not the point. You think I'm going to let employees decide who gets free food? You want to run a diner, Grace, be my guest. Otherwise, do your job or pack your things." The man in the booth looked down, shame burning in his expression. Grace forced herself to keep steady, even as her stomach knotted. "Then dock it from my pay," she said, voice low but firm. "But I won't let someone starve while I stand here doing nothing." For a second, the diner went silent, except for the hum of the neon lights. Karen's nostrils flared, but before she could retort, the bell above the door jangled again. Jason Reed, Grace's ex, strode in, his suit sharp, his shoes clicking on the linoleum. He spotted Grace instantly, smirk tugging at his lips. Well, still here, huh? Guess good people don't pay bills, em." Her stomach sank. Of all nights, of all witnesses. Jason ordered loudly. Karen fumed behind the counter, and the homeless man ate quietly, every bite slow and deliberate, as though it was sacred. Grace felt the walls closing in around her. As the clock ticked toward midnight, the storm outside worsened, snow piling against the door. Grace moved from table to table, refilling coffee, avoiding Jason's smug looks, enduring Corinne's pointed glares, but her mind kept drifting back to the man in the booth. Finally, he finished his plate, wiped his mouth with the paper napkin, and stood. He placed a few coins on the table, though it wasn't enough to cover even the coffee. He walked over to Grace, his pale eyes meeting hers. "Kindness never goes unnoticed," he said quietly. "Remember that." Before she could respond, he pulled his tattered coat tight and walked back out into the storm. Grace stood frozen, his words echoing in her chest. Corinne's voice snapped her back. "If you ever pull that stunt again, Grace, you're done here." Jason chuckled from his booth, raising his glass as if to toast her downfall. Grace forced herself to keep working, but her heart hammered. Something about the man's voice, the way he said it, it didn't feel like empty gratitude. It felt like a promise. Outside, the snow swallowed him whole. And Grace had no idea that her life was about to be turned upside down. The storm outside howled louder, slamming against the diner's thin glass as if the night wanted to break through. Grace stood stiff at the counter, the words still echoing in her mind. Kindness never goes unnoticed. She couldn't shake them, even as Corinne's sharp voice cut across the room like a whip. "Grace," Corinne snapped, slamming a receipt book down so hard the truckers flinched. "That little stunt of yours, paying for some drifter's food, consider this your final warning." Grace tightened her grip on the coffee pot, forcing her face neutral. "I already said I paid for it myself. It won't cost the diner a dime." Corinne's lips curved into a cold smile. "That's not the point. We're not here to play Mother Teresa. You want to throw your paycheck away on lost causes. Do it outside my diner. One more time and you're done. Clear." The words landed like blows, but Grace nodded. "Clear." Corinne leaned in, her perfume sharp, her tone venomous. "You think you're special because you've got a bleeding heart. Customers don't respect weakness, Grace. Remember that." Grace turned away, throat burning. She focused on pouring Jason Reed's refill, though every fiber in her body screamed to dump the coffee in his smug lap. He smirked, stirring sugar into his cup with deliberate slowness. "You never learn, do you?" Jason said, voice dripping with mockery. "Always rescuing strays. Always the saint, and look where it's gotten you, still waiting tables while the world eats you alive." Grace set the cup down a little too hard. "Enjoy your coffee, Jason." He leaned back, smirk widening. "I am, especially watching you burn bridges for losers who can't even pay for breakfast." The sting of his words clawed at her ribs, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a response. Instead, she moved to the jukebox, pretending to check the chord, anything to avoid his gaze. The clock ticked past midnight. Snow piled against the door, trapping the small crowd of night owls. The truckers muttered about icy highways. Lily Carter, Grace's closest friend and fellow waitress, slipped in from the kitchen with an armful of plates. "You okay?" Lily whispered, sliding a burger onto a table. Grace forced a half smile. "I've had better nights." Corinne's breathing fire again. "Worse," Grace sighed, glancing at Jason. "And of course he had to show up." "What?" Lily followed her gaze and wrinkled her nose. "Ah, the ex, the one who dumped you because you wouldn't move to Philly with him." Grace nodded, bitterness curling her stomach. "The one who told me dreams don't pay bills." "Well," Lily muttered, "dreams might not pay bills, but jerks like him don't feed the soul either." Grace couldn't help the small laugh that bubbled up. It was weak, but it kept her from crumbling. Lily's presence was a lifeline, though Grace knew Lily couldn't protect her forever. Corinne stalked past again, tossing a stack of dirty dishes onto the counter. "And Grace, you better pray corporate doesn't hear about this. They don't like bleeding heart waitresses risking lawsuits over charity cases." The words sliced deep. Grace knew Corinne would make good on her threat. This job, her rent, her future classes, could vanish with one angry phone call. She bit her lip, her eyes drifting to the booth where the homeless man had sat earlier. Empty now, except for the faint outline of coins left on the table. It was as if he had never existed, except for those haunting words, "Kindness never goes unnoticed." As the hours dragged on, tension simmered. Grace moved like a ghost between tables, every smile forced, every step heavier. Jason lingered far longer than necessary, nursing cup after cup of coffee, clearly enjoying the show of her unraveling. Finally, near closing, Lily slid into the seat beside Grace at the counter. You know, I think you did the right thing. Grace stared at her friend, surprised. Don't look at me like that, Lily said firmly. Some people don't get it. Karen, Jason, they'd let a man freeze before giving him a sandwich, but you've got heart, and that matters. Grace's throat tightened. Heart doesn't pay tuition or rent, and if I lose this job. You won't. Lily reached for her hand under the counter, giving it a squeeze. You're stronger than you think. For a moment, Grace believed her. She let the warmth of her friend's words sink in. But the fragile calm shattered when one of the truckers barked, Hey, is this you? He held up his phone. On the screen, a grainy video played, Grace sliding money into the register, then setting a plate in front of the homeless man. Someone had filmed the whole thing. The diner went silent, every head turned toward Grace. Jason let out a sharp laugh. Oh, this is rich, the waitress with a savior complex going viral for feeding bums. Karen snatched the phone from the trucker, her face reddening as the video looped. You've got to be kidding me, she hissed. Grace, do you realize what this means? If this spreads, people will think we're handing out free food to every drifter in town. It's not like that, Grace began, but Karen cut her off. Don't bother, you embarrass this diner and me in front of customers and who knows how many online. One more screw up and you're finished. Mark my words. The humiliation was suffocating. Grace's chest heaved, her hands trembling as whispers rippled across the diner. She caught Jason's satisfied grin, Karen's venomous glare, the trucker's amused curiosity. And beneath it all, a cold dread spread through her veins. The video wasn't just a secret anymore, it was out there, and she had no idea what storm it might unleash. Snow beat against the windows, the diner lights flickered once, and Grace realized the night wasn't done testing her yet. Because the man she thought had vanished forever, the homeless stranger with pale blue eyes, was about to walk back into her life. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed, flickering against the storm outside as Grace's world tilted on its axis. She could still hear the faint echo of Karen's fury, Jason's smug laughter, and the whispered comments from strangers replaying in her head. The video, grainy, poorly lit, but damning, was out there now, and if it spread, it wouldn't just be Karen breathing down her neck, it would be everyone. Grace forced her legs to move, clearing empty cups and wiping down the counter as if routine could steady her. Her hands shook so badly that the rag nearly slipped from her grip. The bell above the diner's door jingled. Grace's head snapped up. For a moment she thought the storm had conjured a ghost. The homeless man, Thomas, stepped back inside. Snow dusted his shoulders, clung to the frayed edges of his coat. His pale blue eyes scanned the room before landing on her. Conversations faltered, even Jason's faltered, smirking. Grace's heart thudded against her ribs. Why had he come back? And why tonight when everything already hung by a thread? Thomas walked slowly to the same booth by the window. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he placed a hand on the back of the seat, eyes never leaving Grace's. Mind if I warm up a while? Grace swallowed hard and nodded. Of course. Karen's heels clicked against the linoleum as she stormed forward. Absolutely not. You've had your charity case for the week, Grace. I won't have him. But Thomas's voice cut through hers, low and steady. I can pay this time. Gasps scattered through the diner. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded bill. It was worn but unmistakable, a crisp 50. Karen's eyes widened. Where did you? Does it matter? Thomas asked, his tone cool, almost challenging. I'd like a hot meal, unless you're turning down paying customers now. Karen's jaw clenched. She snatched the bill from his hand and muttered, Fine, but don't cause trouble. Thomas slid into the booth, his posture calm but commanding. Grace forced her legs to move toward him, her notepad trembling in her hand. What would you like? He smiled faintly. Whatever you recommend, I trust your judgment. The words rattled her. Trust. Nobody said that to her, not Karen, not Jason, not anyone. She scribbled down a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and coffee before retreating to the counter. Jason leaned back in his booth, watching the scene with narrowed eyes. Well, isn't this interesting? Your little friend comes back with money. What's next, Grace? You're opening a shelter in the back. She ignored him, focusing on the order slip, but her stomach twisted. Something about the way Thomas carried himself tonight, different from earlier, stronger, sharper, made her uneasy. Lily appeared at her side, whispering urgently. Did you see that? A $50 bill. Where would he get that? Grace shook her head. I don't know. but he doesn't feel like the same man who walked in here hungry." They shared a look, both unsettled. Minutes later, Grace delivered the plate. Thomas looked up at her with quiet intensity. "You didn't have to help me earlier, but you did. Why?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him about her mother, about the nights they'd scraped by with neighbors' kindness. But with Jason listening, Karen lurking, and half the diner pretending not to stare, the words caught in her chest. Instead, she whispered, "Because no one deserves to be forgotten." His gaze softened, but something unreadable flickered beneath it. As he ate, the storm outside worsened. The diner became a cocoon of whispers and speculation. One of the truckers pulled out his phone again, muttering, "Videos already on Facebook, getting shares fast." Grace's stomach dropped. Karen overheard too. She hissed, "If corporate sees this before I do damage control, you're finished, Grace." Grace bit back tears. It didn't matter that she'd paid with her own money. To Karen, perception was everything. Then, as if the night wasn't cruel enough, Jason stood and raised his voice just enough to carry. "Folks, let's give a hand to Grace, the saint of Miller's Diner, feeding the homeless while the rest of us pay full price." Laughter rippled through the room. Grace's cheeks burned. Thomas set down his fork, his jaw tightening. He pushed back from the booth and stood, his shadow stretching across the tiled floor. "That's enough." The room stilled. His voice carried weight now, not the broken tone of a beggar, but the command of someone used to being obeyed. Jason scoffed, "Excuse me, who are you two?" "You don't need to know who I am," Thomas said, eyes glinting. "But you should know this. Mocking kindness says more about you than it does about her." Gasps, whispers, Jason's smirk faltered. Grace's pulse raced. Who was this man? Karen stormed over, face flushed. "I don't care who you think you are. You don't talk to paying customers like that." Thomas turned to her, calm but firm. "I am a paying customer, and you should treat your staff with more respect." The room fell silent. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. She spun on her heel and stomped toward the kitchen, muttering curses. Grace's hands shook as she gathered Thomas's empty plate. "Why? Why are you defending me?" she whispered. He leaned closer, voice barely audible. "Because people like you don't come around often, and because I know what it feels like to be underestimated." Her breath caught before she could ask more. The bell above the door jangled again. A young man in a slick parka strode in, shaking snow from his boots. He scanned the diner, spotted Thomas, and froze. His face went pale. "Mr. Gray," he blurted, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" Every head swiveled toward Thomas. Even Karen peeked from the kitchen doorway. Gray stared, stunned. "Mr. Gray." Thomas's eyes hardened. He gave the faintest shake of his head, silencing the young man, but the damage was done. Whispers erupted around the diner. Jason's smirk returned, but it was tinged with confusion now. Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She thought she was helping a man with nothing, but tonight it seemed she had stepped into something much bigger, something dangerous. And she wasn't sure she was ready for what came next. The storm outside raged harder, but it was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside Miller's Diner. The young man in the parka stood frozen at the entrance, his wide eyes fixed on Thomas. "Mr. Gray," he repeated, louder this time, as though he couldn't quite believe it. "It's really you." The name ricocheted through the diner like a gunshot. Conversation stalled, forks clinked against plates, and every head turned toward Thomas. Grace's pulse quickened. "Mr. Gray," she replayed the words in her mind. He wasn't just some drifter. Whoever this man was, someone clearly recognized him. Jason leaned back in his booth, eyebrows raised. Well, this is getting interesting. Looks like our mystery man has a name after all." Karen emerged from the kitchen, her lipstick smudged from chewing her lip. "What's going on here?" she demanded. The young man in the parka looked around, suddenly aware of the audience, then lowered his voice slightly. "Sir, we've been looking for you. Everyone thought you disappeared." Thomas, Mr. Gray, held the young man's gaze steadily, his face unreadable. "I'm not interested in being found," he said flatly. The boy looked desperate. "But your company, your family there." "Enough," Thomas interrupted, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Not here." Whispers erupted among the truckers and late-night customers. Grace's stomach twisted as she set a plate on the counter. Company, family, none of this made sense. Jason smirked, clearly enjoying the drama. "So our little saint fed a runaway CEO. What's next?" Grace started GoFundMe for him. The laughter that followed stung worse than a slap. Grace kept her chin high, but inside she burned. Corinne, seizing the moment, crossed her arms and sneered. Well, isn't this convenient? Our so-called homeless man turns out to be someone important. Figures. Probably a scam to get free meals. Grace spun toward her. That's not true. He didn't even want me to. Corinne cut her off, raising her voice so the whole diner heard. You see, folks, this is why you don't let emotions run a business. My waitress thought she was saving a poor soul, and instead she's made us look like fools. The humiliation pressed down like a weight. Grace's cheeks burned, but she couldn't bring herself to back down. I don't regret what I did, she said firmly, her voice trembling only slightly. I saw a man who was hungry. That's all that mattered. For the first time, Thomas spoke, not to Corinne, not to Jason, but to everyone. And she was right, he said, his voice calm yet commanding. Judge me if you want, but Grace Miller is the only one here who remembered what it means to be human. The diner went quiet. Even the storm seemed to pause outside. Corinne's face turned crimson. You think one act of charity makes her some kind of hero? She broke policy. She embarrassed this diner, and she'll be lucky if she has a job tomorrow. Grace's stomach dropped, but before fear could choke her, a sound filled the room. Applause. It started with Lily at the counter, her palms slapping together with fierce determination. Then one of the truckers joined in. Within seconds, half the diner was clapping for Grace, their voices rising in support. Corinne froze, stunned. Jason scowled, muttering under his breath. Grace's throat tightened, tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. She managed a small smile, her heart swelling at the unexpected support. But the moment shattered when Corinne slammed her hand on the counter. Enough, this circus ends now. Grace, office now. Grace hesitated, but Lily whispered, Go, don't let her win by being afraid. With her knees weak, Grace followed Corinne into the tiny back office. The door shut with a harsh click, cutting off the muffled voices outside. Corinne whirled around, eyes blazing. Do you understand what you've done? That video is spreading, and now we've got some lunatic claiming to be Mr. Grace sitting in my booth. If corporate finds out about this, it won't just be your job on the line, it'll be mine too. Grace stood her ground. I didn't ask for the video, I didn't ask for him to come back, but I won't apologize for helping someone. Corinne's eyes narrowed. You think compassion is going to save you? Wake up, Grace. The world doesn't reward martyrs, it chews them up and spits them out. Grace clenched her fists. Maybe, but I'd rather be chewed up than become like you, so scared of looking weak that you forget how to become. Corinne's mouth opened in fury, but before she could respond, a knock rattled the door. Grace, it was Lily. You better come out here now. Corinne yanked the door open, ready to unleash her wrath, but the sight in the diner froze her in place. Thomas stood in the center of the room, his coat draped over the booth, his presence commanding. The young man in the parka hovered beside him, pale and anxious. The customers were leaning in, hanging on every word. And Thomas, Mr. Gray, was speaking. I didn't come here for sympathy, he said, his eyes sweeping the diner. But I see now that my disappearance didn't go unnoticed. Some of you may recognize me, some may not. The truth will come out soon enough. But tonight, I want to make something clear. He turned toward Grace. This woman did what none of you did. She acted when she saw need, not for recognition, not for gain, just because it was right. Grace's chest tightened. All eyes were on her, and she felt both exposed and seen in a way she never had before. But Corinne, unwilling to lose control, stepped forward. Enough theatrics. Whoever you are, you're trespassing on my business. Pay your bill and leave. Thomas's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Careful, Miss Brooks, you don't know who you're dismissing. Corinne scoffed. Oh, I know exactly what you are, a fraud looking for attention. The room gasped. Grace's stomach lurched. She wanted to stop Corinne, to warn her, but it was too late. Thomas straightened, his presence suddenly electric, dangerous. You'll regret those words. And at that moment, Grace realized she wasn't the only one with something to lose. The storm outside pounded harder, shaking the glass. The diner felt smaller, the air thicker, as though it too knew a reckoning was coming. Thomas's gaze shifted, locking on Grace with an intensity that stole her breath. Tomorrow, he said quietly but loud enough for all to hear, come find me, then you'll know the truth. The room erupted in whispers, questions, speculation. Corinne sputtered, Jason smirked, the truckers exchanged bewildered glances, but Grace stood frozen, her heart hammering, her mind spinning. Because deep down she knew this was no idle invitation. It was a challenge, and if she accepted, her life would never be the same. The diner had never felt so small. Thomas's words hung in the air. Tomorrow, come find me, then you'll know the truth. Grace couldn't move, couldn't speak. It was as if the storm outside had burst through the glass and frozen her in place. Karen muttered something sharp under her breath. Jason chuckled smugly, and the customers began buzzing like bees in a shaken hive. But all Grace could hear was the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat, pounding out questions she didn't dare voice. Who was this man really? What truth could he possibly show her, and why her? The diner finally emptied out near 2 a.m. Truckers left first,
then the stragglers, until only Lily and Grace remained to clean up. Jason had lingered just long enough to make another cutting remark. Be careful, Em. You never know what kind of scams desperate men pull, before heading back into the snow. Grace wiped down the counter with trembling hands. Lily glanced at her nervously. You're not actually going to go tomorrow?
Lily glanced at her nervously. You're not actually going to go tomorrow, are you? Grace hesitated. I don't know. Grace, Lily pressed, lowering her voice. This guy shows up in rags, you pay for his food, and suddenly he's got 50s and strangers calling him Mr. Gray. It doesn't add up. What if he's dangerous? Grace bit her lip. He didn't feel dangerous. That's what everyone says before they end up in a true crime documentary. Despite herself, Grace laughed, the sound shaky and hollow. But Lily's words lingered. She didn't know Thomas, not really. All she knew was the look in his eyes, the kind of look that came from a life of loss, but also from someone used to being listened to. By the time Grace finally stumbled into her tiny apartment, dawn was just a few hours away. She curled up on the couch, still in her uniform, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow. Should she curl? If she didn't, would she regret it forever? Sleep eventually pulled her under, but uneasily, filled with dreams of snow, strangers, and voices whispering her name. The next day, Miller's diner buzzed with whispers before Grace even clocked in. The video had spread overnight: Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, millions of views, comments ranging from what a saint to she should be fired for breaking policy. Corinne's expression was thunderous as Grace tied on her apron. Corporate called, she hissed. They saw the video. You'd better pray this blows over fast or you'll be serving coffee on the street corner. Grace swallowed hard. I'll work double shifts. No, Corinne snapped. What you'll do is keep your head down and stop embarrassing me. Grace nodded, though fire simmered in her chest. Embarrassing her. Corinne hadn't lifted a finger to help anyone in her life. By late afternoon, Grace couldn't take it anymore. She untied her apron, ignored Corinne's protests, and walked out into the bitter cold. Snow crunched under her boots as she followed the address scribbled hastily on the back of a receipt, a note Thomas had slipped her when no one else was looking. It led her across town to an old Victorian house on a quiet street. Its shutters were weathered, the paint peeling, but the structure stood proud against the winter sky. Grace hesitated at the gate, her breath fogging in the air. This is insane, she thought, but something pulled her forward. She knocked. The door creaked open. Thomas stood there, no longer the frail figure from the diner. He had shaved, his hair combed back. Though his clothes were simple, they were clean pressed. His presence filled the doorway with quiet authority. Grace, he said, as if he had expected her. Come in. She stepped inside cautiously. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The furniture was worn but elegant, a glimpse of a past life that hadn't been cheap. Sit, Thomas said, gesturing to a leather armchair. He took the seat across from her, folding his hands. You want the truth, he said finally. Grace's heart pounded. Yes. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. My name is Thomas Gray. Years ago, I built one of the largest financial firms in the country. I had everything: wealth, power, respect, and then I lost it. Grace blinked. You had everything. What happened? His jaw tightened. Greed, betrayal. People I trusted sold me out. My name became poison in the boardroom. I walked away before they could destroy me completely. Her mind spun. She wanted to believe him, but it sounded impossible. So why end up here, alone, in a diner? He leaned forward, his pale blue eyes piercing. Because I needed to know, to see if kindness still existed when no one had anything to gain. And you, Grace, it proved it does. Who jest, Ig? You're telling me all this because I need your help. The words hung between them. Grace's pulse raced. His help, him, this fallen giant, needed her. Thomas continued, voice low. There are people who want to see me erased, but there's also something bigger, something I left unfinished. a fund meant to help those who slip through society's cracks. It's been sitting dormant, tied up in legal knots. I need someone I can trust to help bring it back to life. Grace shook her head. Me, I'm a waitress. I can barely pay my rent. That's exactly why, Thomas said firmly. Because you understand what it's like to have nothing, because you act without expecting reward. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say no, to walk away from this madness, but deep inside a spark flared, the same spark that had carried her through endless double shifts and sleepless nights. The thought that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than this. Before she could answer, the front door burst open. Corinne stood in the doorway, snow in her hair, her eyes blazing with triumph. I knew it, she hissed. I knew you were hiding something, and you, she pointed at Grace, sneaking off in the middle of your shift. You've just signed your own termination. Grace's stomach dropped. Corinne, how did you? Doesn't matter, Corinne snapped. What matters is you're done, and you, she glared at Thomas. Your little act won't fool me. You're a fraud, and I'll make sure everyone knows it. Thomas rose slowly, his expression unreadable. Be careful what you say, Miss Brooks. Words have power and consequences. Corinne smirked. Not for me, for you. I'll bury both of you. The air crackled with tension. Grace's chest constricted, torn between fear and fury. She wanted to scream, to fight, to defend the man who had believed in her. But before she could speak, Thomas looked at Corinne with an intensity that made her falter for just a second. You're making a dangerous mistake, he said quietly. The storm outside howled, rattling the windows. And Grace realized whatever came next, she was already in too deep to turn back. The storm hammered against the old Victorian house, snow piling high along the porch steps as if nature itself wanted to trap them inside. Grace's breath came shallow, her mind reeling from the confrontation. Corinne stood in the doorway, triumphant and furious, her presence like a dagger in the room. I should have known you'd pull something like this, Grace. Corinne spat, her lipstick smudged, her coat dripping melted snow onto the rug. Sneaking off during your shift to meet this con artist. Thomas remained calm, his posture unshaken. Ms. Brooks, he said evenly, you're trespassing. Corinne let out a sharp laugh. Trespassing? Don't make me laugh. You're the one trespassing in people's lives, pretending to be some fallen king while you leech off the kindness of fools like her. She jerked her chin toward Grace. Grace's fists clenched. He's not pretending. You don't know anything about him. Oh, don't I? Corinne sneered. I did my homework. Thomas Gray, disgraced CEO, accused of fraud, disappeared when his empire collapsed, and now he's crawling around diners, letting naive girls believe he's some tragic hero. Pathetic. The words hit Grace like icy water. Fraud. She glanced at Thomas, searching his face for denial, for outrage, but he stayed silent, his eyes shadowed. Is it true? Grace whispered. Thomas finally spoke, his voice steady but low. There were accusations, yes, but lies spread faster than truth. What they never told the public is that the fraud wasn't mine, it was theirs, the board, the men who wanted me out. I walked away because fighting them would have destroyed me, and I wasn't willing to become what they were. Grace's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. Every instinct screamed that he wasn't lying, but Corinne's voice slithered in again. Listen to him spin it, Grace. That's what liars do best, and guess what? Corporate already knows about your little stunt at the diner. They're furious. By tomorrow morning you'll be unemployed, unless, she let the word hang, savoring it, you help me expose him. Grace froze. Expose him? What are you talking about? Corinne stepped closer, her eyes gleaming. He's hiding assets, I'm sure of it. Men like him don't just vanish without a golden parachute. If we dig, if we push, we can find it, and I'll make sure corporate spares your job. Hell, you may even get a promotion. Grace's stomach churned. Corinne wanted her to betray Thomas, to sell out the one person who had looked at her like she was more than a waitress in an apron. Thomas's gaze locked on hers. He didn't plead. He didn't beg. He just waited. Grace shook her head. I won't do it. Corinne's eyes flashed with fury. Then don't expect sympathy when you're jobless by dawn. You think he's going to save you. He can't even save himself. What? She spun on her heel and stormed back into the night, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the storm outside. Grace sank into the armchair, her hands trembling. She said, fraud. She said you lost everything. Thomas sat across from her, his face heavy with shadows. I did lose everything, but not the way she thinks, not because I took, because I refused to take. Her chest ached. So all of this, the diner me paying for your meal, was that some kind of test? His voice softened, yes, but not just a test, a reminder. I needed to see if compassion still existed in a world that chews people up and spits them out. And you, Grace, you proved it does. Her throat, Grace, you proved it does. Her throat tightened. Why me? Because you didn't see a headline, you didn't see a ruined man. You saw a human being. That's rare. The words lodged deep in her chest, stirring something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of worth, of possibility. But alongside it came fear. If Karen went through with her threats, Grace's life could crumble before it even began. Thomas must have read the turmoil on her face. You're afraid. Of course I'm afraid, she admitted. I can't lose my job. I can't lose the little I have left. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes burning with quiet intensity. What if I told you I could give you more than a job? What if I told you I could give you a future? Grace blinked. What do you mean? He stood, walked to a desk in the corner, and pulled out a leather folder.
He set it in front of her, opening it to reveal documents, bank statements, trust records, letters of incorporation. Grace's eyes widened. This, Thomas said, is the Gray Foundation, a charity I built before everything collapsed. It was supposed to fund shelters, clinics, scholarships for people who had nothing. When I fell, they froze it, but the assets are still there, locked away, waiting. Grace stared at the numbers, her breath catching. This is millions.
Billions, Thomas corrected quietly. And I can't bring it back alone, but with someone like you, someone who remembers why it matters, it can live again. Her head spun. This wasn't just a twist of fate. It was a door opening to a world she never imagined. But then reality slammed back. Karen, corporate, Jason, the video. Her entire life could implode before she even touched this dream. She looked up at Thomas, her voice breaking. If I help you, I lose everything else. He met her gaze steadily. Or you gain everything you've ever wanted. The storm roared outside, shaking the old house as if urging her to decide. Grace's heart pounded, torn between safety and destiny, between fear and faith. And deep down, she knew there was no turning back. But before she could answer, headlights cut through the snow outside. A black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the house. Doors slammed, heavy footsteps crunched against the ice. Thomas's face darkened. They've found me. What? Grace's blood ran cold. Who? The ones who destroyed everything, he said, his voice low and urgent. And if you stay, Grace, they'll destroy you too. The doorknob rattled, a fist pounded against the wood. Thomas Gray, a voice barked, open up. Grace's world spun. She had seconds to decide, stay and face the storm inside, or run before it swallowed her whole.
The pounding on the front door grew louder, each blow shaking the frame as though the storm itself had taken human form. Grace's breath came in shallow gasps. She glanced at Thomas, but his face was grim, his pale eyes steady. They've found me, he repeated, his voice low. The men outside shouted again. Thomas Gray, you've run long enough. Open the door or we'll come in. Grace's stomach churned. She whispered, what do they want? Thomas's jaw tightened.
Everything, the scraps of power they didn't already steal, and if they can't have that, they'll settle for destroying me. The words chilled her. She looked at the door, then back at him. Should we call the police? He shook his head. The police are in their pockets. They'll spin it as a manhunt for a criminal. The truth won't matter. The doorknob rattled violently. Grace's pulse raced. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Thomas stepped toward her, his voice steady. You can leave out the back, Grace. No one knows you're here. You still have a chance to walk away. Her chest tightened and laid you to them. His gaze softened, but there was no fear in it, only resolve. I've been running from this moment for years. Maybe it's time I stop. The pounding turned into a crash. The door burst open, splintering under the force of heavy boots. 3 men stormed inside, dressed in dark coats, their eyes cold and hard. One carried a folder, another a briefcase, but their presence felt more dangerous than any weapon. The tallest of them stepped forward. His hair was silver, his suit immaculate despite the snow clinging to his shoes. Thomas, he said smoothly, almost with amusement, you look terrible. Thomas's lips curved into a humorless smile. And you, Richard, still look like a vulture. Grace froze. Richard, one of the men who had betrayed him. Richard's eyes flicked to her, sharp and assessing. And who is this, another stray you've picked up? Thomas moved slightly, blocking her with his frame. She's none of your concern. Richard's smirk widened. On the contrary, everyone connected to you becomes my concern. Grace felt the weight of those words press against her chest. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was in the crosshairs. The man with the briefcase stepped forward, snapping it open to reveal documents. You signed agreements, Thomas. You walked away, but you didn't walk free. The foundation is ours now. You have no claim, no authority. Thomas's voice was iron. The foundation was never yours to begin with. It was meant for people who needed it, not for your pockets. Spare us the moral theater, Richard cut in. You lost. We won. All that's left is for you to disappear permanently. The words sucked the air out of the room. Grace's throat went dry. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasing him. Thomas stood tall, unshaken. You can take what you want from me, but you'll never bury the truth. Richard laughed softly. Truth. The public believes what we tell them, and right now they believe you're a fraud, a thief, a ghost. Grace's heart ached. She couldn't stay silent. That's not true, she burst out, her voice trembling but fierce. I saw him. I saw the man he is. He's not what you say. Richard turned his gaze on her, cold and amused. Ah, so the waitress speaks. Sweetheart, you have no idea what game you've stumbled into. Do yourself a favor and walk away before you're crushed. Grace swallowed hard, but her voice didn't waver. Maybe I don't know your game, but I know decency when I see it, and I'd rather stand with him than with men who destroy lives. For the first time, Richard's smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. Careful, girl. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulders, steadying her. She's not the one who needs to be careful. The storm rattled the windows, thunder rumbling in the distance. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath. Then Richard snapped his fingers. Enough talk, take him. The two men moved forward, Grace's chest constricted. She grabbed Thomas's arm. No. Thomas turned to her, his expression calm but urgent. Grace, listen to me. Whatever happens tonight, you must find the key. Her brow furrowed. The key. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper meant only. Before she could respond, the men seized him, their grip iron. He didn't resist, though his eyes burned with defiance. Grace's throat tightened. Stop, you can't take him. Richard shot her a glance. Watch us. They dragged Thomas toward the door. Grace's mind screamed at her to do something, anything, but her body felt frozen. She wanted to lunge, to fight, but the sight of Richard's cold smile rooted her in place. Just as they reached the threshold, Thomas turned his head, his gaze locked with Grace's, fierce and unyielding. Remember, Grace, the key. And then he was gone, swallowed by the storm outside. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving the house vibrating with silence. Grace stood in the wreckage, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. Lily's warnings echoed in her mind, Corinne's threats rang in her ears, but all she could feel was the emptiness of the room without him. She stumbled toward the study, her legs weak, her hands shaking. The top drawer of the old oak desk slid open with a groan. Inside lay a small black box, no bigger than her palm. She lifted it, her fingers trembling. A brass key gleamed in the dim light. Beneath it, a single folded note. Her stomach knotted as she unfolded the paper. In Thomas's steady handwriting were 4 words. Trust no one, not yet. Her breath caught. Not yet. What did it mean? Who could she trust? Before she could process, headlights flared through the window. Another car pulled up outside. Grace's blood ran cold. Was it Richard returning, or someone else entirely? She clutched the key to her chest, her pulse racing. Whatever lay ahead, she was now in the middle of a war she barely understood. And for the first time, she realized her life would never return to what it had been. The beam of headlights cut across the living room, spilling through the cracked blinds and washing the walls in a harsh glow. Grace froze, clutching the brass key to her chest, her breath sharp in her lungs. She had seconds. If it was Richard coming back, if they realized she was still inside, it would be over. The car door slammed, footsteps crunched over snow. The doorknob rattled. Grace's pulse pounded in her ears. She scanned the room desperately for a way out, her eyes landing on the back hallway that led toward the kitchen. If she moved fast, she could slip out the rear door, vanish into the storm. Grace, you in there? Her knees nearly buckled at the sound of the voice. Lily. She hurried to the door and yanked it open. Snow swirled around her friend, who looked pale and frantic beneath her wool hat. Lily, Grace gasped, pulling her inside. What are you doing here? I should be asking you that, Lily cried, shaking snow from her coat. I went by the diner and Karen said you ran off with him. The whole place is buzzing with rumors. Then I saw the SUV heading this way. Grace, what happened?" Grace's throat tightened. "They took him, 3 men, one of them named Richard. They dragged him out into the storm." Lily's eyes widened. "Oh my God, where?" "I don't know," Grace admitted, her voice cracking. "But before they left, Thomas told me to find a key, and I did." She opened her palm, revealing the brass key glinting under the dim lamp. "He said it would explain everything." Lily leaned closer, her brows furrowing. "What does it open?" Grace shook her head. "I don't know, but there was a note." She unfolded the paper again, the words burning into her mind. "Trust no one, not yet." Lily exhaled sharply. "That doesn't make me feel better." "I don't think it was supposed to," Grace murmured. For a moment the two women stood in silence, the storm raging outside as though urging them to act. Grace's mind raced. She had the key, yes, but to what? A safe, a locker, a vault. Whatever it was, it had to matter. Enough that Thomas had risked everything to leave it in her hands. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, the screen lighting her pale face. Notifications exploded across her social media feeds. The video of her paying for Thomas's meal had gone fully viral now. Millions of views, endless comments, hashtags with her name attached. Grace scrolled in horror. Some called her a hero, others called her a fraud, and buried among the noise was one comment that made her blood run cold. "She's with him, she knows where he is." Her phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. "They're watching me," she whispered. "The internet, the whole world, they think I'm part of this." Lily bent to pick up the phone. "Then we need to be careful. If they think you're helping him, they'll come after you too." Grace's chest constricted. "I can't just hide, Lily, not after everything. He trusted me. I have to figure out what this key means." Her friend looked torn, fear etched across her face, but then she nodded. "Okay, then we'll figure it out together. You're not doing this alone." Tears stung Grace's eyes. She squeezed Lily's hand, grateful for the lifeline of loyalty. They searched the house first, moving room to room, opening drawers and cabinets, testing locks, but the key didn't fit anything. By the time they circled back to the study, frustration burned in Grace's chest. "This isn't working," she muttered, slamming the drawer shut. "What if he met somewhere else? What if I'm supposed to know, but I don't?" "Wait," Lily interrupted, pointing at the desk. "What's that?" Grace followed her gaze. Beneath the stack of papers lay a framed photo, its glass cracked. She pulled it free, brushing away dust. It showed a younger Thomas in a suit, standing with several other men in front of a gleaming skyscraper. But it wasn't the faces that drew her attention, it was the background. The building had a name etched in steel above the glass doors, Gray Tower. Grace's pulse skipped. His company headquarters. Lily frowned. "You think the key is for something there?" "It has to be," Grace said, determination rising in her chest. "A safe deposit box, a private office, something he left behind." Lily bit her lip. "That place is probably crawling with security. If those men really own it now." "I don't care," Grace cut in. "If this key is the only way to clear his name, then I have to use it. I can't let them erase him." Lily sighed, but her eyes softened. "Then I'm coming with you." Grace's throat tightened. "Lily." "No arguments," her friend said firmly. "If you're going to walk into the lion's den, you're not walking in alone." The words struck deep, filling Grace with a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. Despite everything, the fear, the danger, she wasn't completely alone. Still, fear nodded her. The storm outside wasn't just weather anymore. It was a mirror of the chaos closing in on her life. She could almost hear Thomas's voice echoing in her memory. "Trust no one, not yet." But she had no choice. She would have to trust Lily or lose her mind completely. They packed quickly, grabbing what they could carry. Grace tucked the key into her pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. As they pulled on their coats and stepped back into the storm, Grace glanced once more at the old Victorian house. Its windows glowed faintly in the snow, but it felt empty, hollow. The man who had filled it with purpose was gone. "Wherever they took you," she whispered into the night, "I'll find you, I promise." Lily touched her arm. "We should move before anyone else shows up." Grace nodded, forcing her legs forward, every step heavier than the last. They reached Lily's car, its engine sputtering to life. Grace slid into the passenger seat, her hands clenched around the key. As the tires crunched over snow and the house disappeared into the storm behind them, a mixture of dread and determination surged through her veins. She didn't know what waited at Great Tower, but she knew this. It was the next step, the only step. The city lights flickered faintly on the horizon, glowing against the storm clouds. And Grace's gut told her that by the time she left that tower, her life and Thomas's fate would be changed forever. The city, the swirling snow giving way to icy rain that streaked across the windshield. The skyline rose ahead, jagged, glittering, and cold. Grace pressed her palm over the pocket where the brass key rested, its weight grounding her even as doubt gnawed at her insides. Great Tower loomed above the others, a shard of steel and glass piercing the clouds. Even in the storm, its windows glowed with sterile light. To Grace, it looked less like a building and more like a fortress, a place that belonged to men like Richard, not to people like her. Lily slowed the car 2 blocks away. "We can't just walk in there," she whispered. "There'll be guards, cameras." "We'll figure it out," Grace said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Her phone buzzed again. Reluctantly, she pulled it out. Jason's name flashed across the screen. She almost ignored it, but something in her gut told her to answer. "Grace," Jason's voice came through, slick as ever. "Where are you?" She gripped the phone tighter. "Why?" "Because you're trending," he said with a smirk she could hear even over the line. "Do you have any idea how many people are watching you right now? You're a walking headline. Waitress turned accomplice. Half the city thinks you're helping a criminal." Her chest tightened. "I'm not." "Doesn't matter," Jason replied. "Perception is reality, and right now reality is about to crush you, but I can help." Grace swallowed. "Help how?" "Come back with me," he said smoothly. "I've got connections, lawyers, PR people. We can spin this, make you the victim of some sob story. You'll keep your job, maybe even land an interview deal. Grace Miller, the girl who got duped by a con man, people eat that up." Her stomach twisted. "You want me to lie?" "I want you to survive," Jason snapped. Then his tone softened, coaxing. "Look, I know you. You don't belong in this world. You belong here with me, building a life that's real. Not chasing after some fantasy about saving billion-dollar charities. He's finished, Grace. Don't let him drag you down with him." The words pierced her, dragging old insecurities to the surface. He was offering safety, stability, the very things she'd craved during endless nights of counting tips. And yet beneath his pitch she heard it, the same dismissive tone he'd always used, the one that said she wasn't capable of more. She glanced at Lily, who was watching silently, worry etched across her face. Grace drew a shaky breath. "I'm not coming back, Jason." A pause, then laughter, cold and cruel. "You really think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Fine. When they haul you out in handcuffs, don't say I didn't warn you." The line went dead. Grace lowered the phone, her chest trembling with both fear and relief. Jason's offer of safety was gone. All that remained was the storm and the key. Lily leaned forward. "You don't have to prove anything to him, or anyone. But if you really believe in this, Grace, then we go in together." Grace nodded, her resolve hardening. They parked in an alley, pulling their coats tighter against the wind. The tower loomed above, its glass doors gleaming under security lights. 2 guards paced out front. Grace's stomach knotted. "How do we get past them?" Lily whispered. Before Grace could answer, a shadow stepped from the alley's end. Grace stiffened, then exhaled in shock. "Jason." Her ex-boyfriend smirked, his hands in his coat pockets. "I told you this was a mistake." Lily bristled. "Were you following us?" Jason ignored her, his eyes fixed on Grace. "Last chance, Em. Hand me the key, and I can make this all go away." Grace instinctively pressed her hand against her pocket. "You don't even know what it opens." Jason's smirk deepened. "Maybe not, but Richard does. And guess who just made a deal with him?" Grace's stomach plummeted. "You're working with them." "Why wouldn't I?" Jason said smoothly. "They've got power, money. You think you're going to beat them with waitress wages and some fairy tale about redemption? Get real." Lily stepped forward. "You're a snake." Jason chuckled. "I'm a survivor, and I'm giving you both a chance to be the same. Hand me the key, Grace. Walk away while you still can." Grace's heart pounded. She looked at him. The man who once claimed to love her, now standing as a mirror of everything Thomas warned her about: betrayal, greed, fear disguised as pragmatism. And then she thought of Thomas's eyes, steady and unwavering as he was dragged into the storm. Trust no one, not yet. Grace pulled the key from her pocket, the brass gleaming under the dim streetlight. Jason's smirk widened as he reached for it. But Grace's grip tightened. No, she said, her voice fierce. This isn't yours, and it never will be. What? Jason's smile vanished, his eyes hardened. Then you've made your choice. He stepped back into the shadows, pulling out his phone. And now they'll know exactly where you are. Grace's blood ran cold. He was calling them. Lily grabbed her arm. We have to move now. Together they darted across the street, the storm lashing their faces. The guards at the front entrance turned at the commotion, but Lily yanked Grace toward a side door, half hidden beneath a service awning. Grace shoved the key into the lock, praying. For a terrifying second it didn't fit, then with a click the door swung open. They slipped inside, the door slamming shut against the howling wind. The interior was silent, sterile. Empty halls stretched in every direction, lined with glass walls and abandoned offices. The air smelled faintly of bleach and dust. Grace clutched the key, her chest heaving. We're in. But before relief could settle, Lily froze. Her eyes widened. Grace, she whispered, pointing ahead. At the far end of the corridor, silhouetted against the glow of fluorescent lights, stood Richard. And behind him, 2 guards. Richard's lips curled into a smile. Welcome home, Miss Miller. We've been expecting you. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights buzzed through the corridor, louder than Grace's heartbeat. Richard stood at the far end, flanked by 2 guards in dark suits. His smile was sharp, practiced, the kind that had probably closed 100 boardroom deals. Welcome, Miss Miller, he said smoothly, his voice echoing against the glass walls. I admire your determination, but it ends here. Grace's grip on the brass key tightened. Lily stood close beside her, fear flashing in her eyes, but she didn't move. They'd come too far to back down. Richard gestured lazily, as though he were hosting a cocktail party rather than a midnight confrontation. Hand me the key, and I might be merciful. Refuse, and you'll leave here in handcuffs, if you leave at all. What? Grace forced herself to step forward, though her knees wobbled. Where is he? Where's Thomas? Richard chuckled, alive for now, but he's no savior, Grace. He's a relic, a man who squandered his fortune on bleeding heart fantasies. The foundation was worthless, a pile of locked assets. He knew it, we knew it. That's why it disappeared. He didn't fall from power, he abandoned it. The words sliced into her, but she didn't let them show. You're lying. Am I? Richard tilted his head. Then tell me, why did he hand you the key? Not a lawyer, not an accountant. You, a waitress with no power, no influence, because even he knew it was meaningless. A gesture to make you feel important before he vanished again. Grace's stomach twisted, doubt clawed at her ribs. What if Richard was right? What if she'd risked everything for nothing? But then she remembered Thomas's voice, steady and unyielding. Trust no one, not yet. Her hands trembled, but her voice steadied. If it's meaningless, then why do you want it so badly? For the first time, Richard's smile faltered. His eyes hardened. Because I don't like loose ends. Grace's pulse spiked. She glanced at Lily, who gave a small nod, courage in her eyes despite the danger. Taking a breath, Grace stepped forward and lifted the key. Then maybe you should see what you've been chasing. She shoved the key into a small panel on the wall, a panel she hadn't even noticed until that moment, half hidden beneath a security badge reader. The brass slid in perfectly. Behind it was a vault. Rows of files, hard drives, and ledgers filled the shelves, neatly organized, untouched by dust. Grace's breath caught as she stepped inside. Lily gasped softly beside her. Thus, Grace whispered, this is it. Richard's mask cracked. He surged forward, but the guards held him back, waiting for his command. His calm veneer was gone, replaced with raw fury. Don't touch anything. But Grace was already reaching for the nearest folder. Inside were detailed accounts, proof of siphoned funds, bribes, offshore transfers, names, dates, signatures, evidence of everything Richard and his allies had stolen. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just about Thomas. This was about everyone they'd destroyed. Lily grabbed another folder, flipping through. Grace, this could clear his name. Richard's voice was venom. You don't understand what you're holding. That information is worthless without context, without power, and you have neither. Grace met his gaze, fire igniting in her chest. Maybe not, but I have something you'll never have, people who believe in the truth. She pulled her phone from her pocket, the camera already recording. She held the folder up for the lens, flipping through page after page. The world is watching, and now they'll see. Richard's face went pale. You wouldn't dare. What? Try me, Grace said. The guards shifted, uncertain. Richard barked at them, "Stop her." But before they could move, another voice rang out from the hallway. "Don't." Grace whipped around. Thomas stood in the doorway, bruised but unbroken, his pale eyes blazing. Her throat tightened. "Thomas." He stepped into the room, his presence commanding even in disheveled clothes. "You've already lost, Richard. The foundation was never yours, and now, thanks to her, the world will know it." For a moment everything froze, then chaos erupted. Richard lunged. The guards moved. Lily screamed. Grace stumbled back, clutching the phone and the folder. Thomas moved like a man reborn, shoving one guard aside, grabbing Richard by the collar. "Your empire ends tonight." Richard snarled, "You can't stop us. You're finished." Thomas leaned close, his voice a growl. "So are you." "What?" The guard regained his footing, swinging toward Thomas, but Lily, tiny, terrified Lily, grabbed a heavy ledger and slammed it into his arm. He dropped with a curse. Grace's heart pounded. She clutched the key, the folder, the phone. For the first time, she didn't feel like the waitress on the sidelines. She felt like the hinge of everything. Thomas turned to her, his voice urgent. "Go, Grace, get it out there." Her throat caught. "What about you?" He smiled faintly. "You've already saved me. Now save them." Tears burned her eyes, but she ran.
Out of the vault, down the sterile hallways, Lily at her side. Shouts echoed behind them, but adrenaline carried her faster than fear. They burst out into the icy night, gasping, trembling, alive. Grace lifted her phone, hit upload, and sent the files to every platform she could. Within seconds, the evidence was no longer theirs to bury. It was everywhere. The city lights shimmered against the storm as her phone buzzed, notifications exploding, comments flooding in. She'd done it.
By the time the police arrived, tipped off by anonymous calls, Richard and his men were cornered. The story had already spread too far for them to bury. And Thomas, when he emerged from the tower, escorted but unbroken, looked at her with a pride that made her heart ache. Days later, the diner buzzed with whispers of her name. Some still mocked, some doubted, but many more applauded. Grace Miller, the waitress who dared to stand up, who risked everything for truth. Karen was gone, her threats silenced. Jason vanished from her life like smoke. But Grace had found something new. She stood beside Thomas and Lily as the Gray Foundation reopened, its funds freed at last. Shelters rose, scholarships launched, lives changed. And when Thomas spoke at the first press conference, he didn't talk about wealth or betrayal. He talked about a young woman in a diner who refused to let kindness die. Grace's throat tightened as she watched, tears slipping free, not of despair but of release. Later, standing alone beneath the winter sky, she whispered to herself, "I thought I was serving a meal, but maybe I was serving my destiny." The storm had passed, and in its wake, Grace Miller finally stepped into the life she was meant to live.